would have been the day before Thanksgiving is when he sent this to me. He said, hey, look, our prospect conversation is interesting. Find 3 prospect for prospect trades that would help Seattle this upcoming season. And it's not without regard at all for seasons after that. But the key is that the player has to project to help the Mariners win in 2022. That's the point. And I'm going to share what I came up with. There are multiple factors and caveats, or one big one, however this explanation actually comes out. There are always going to be reasons why a team, including the Mariners, wouldn't or shouldn't make any individual and specific prospect for prospect trade. There are always going to be folks that find a flaw in them. I can find flaws in every trade actually ever made in Major League Baseball history. That is the beauty of it. But I was asked to do this. I was essentially challenged to find 3 1-for-1 deals using, prospects that rank somewhere in the top 20 in the Mariners organization, using my own rankings to acquire players that help the Mariners in 2022, players that are still considered prospects. They still have to have rookie and prospect status. That's the key here. In 2022, they have to project to help. I have to believe they're going to help. There has to be signs they're going to help. It has to be pretty obvious that they have an opportunity, a real opportunity to help the club win. Not help a 59-win team win 60, but to help an 89-win team maybe win 90 or 91. So it's 1-for-1 only. It's prospect for prospect. I can't package the prospect with other players or prospects or cash or draft picks, and I can't ask for those things back. It is one player for one player and their prospects, and that's it. One prospect from Seattle for one prospect on another team. No other possibilities. Those were the guidelines. And the point of this was initially to demonstrate why and how it's so difficult to make these kinds of trades and why they don't happen much. But I came up with 3 that I'll say raise the eyebrow of Chuck, the scout who asked me to do it. Remember, the trade has to help the Mariners in 2022 and yet still somehow make some sense from a cost standpoint for Seattle and for the other club. It is not an easy task. That's why none of these are perfect. None of these are flawless. Here's what I have, and you're going to notice a very specific theme here when I get to the end. You may even notice it before I get to the final one. The first one, Emerson Hancock to the Atlanta Braves for Christian Pache. One asterisk here, I've mentioned this about Emerson Hancock in trade talks before, is Hancock's health status and the fact that he hasn't pitched a whole lot since his sophomore year in college. But if he were to get a clean bill of health, there's something here in terms of sensibility for both clubs. The Braves still like Pache, but he struggled early in his MLB career, although it's only just 72 plate appearances. He's a 70 runner with 70 center field glove. Average raw power, fringe average hit tool. He just turned 23. He's hit 260 to 285 with plus 50 OBPs all the way through the minors. And he's always going to be more of a defensive-minded player than a bat, but there is upside there with the bat, and there's a decent floor with the bat as well. Because even if he's a 230 or 240 with a 300 OBP, 400 slugging guy, that defense and speed would play really well in Seattle. He'd be able to play every day. Now, Hancock. You guys know about Hancock. Easy 93 to 96, touches 97, 98 without a lot of extra effort. Has 3 secondaries led by a changeup and slider. Projects to throw plenty of strikes and pitch in the middle of a rotation or better. Has upside to be a 2. Again, Hancock's shoulder is the question here, the workload that he doesn't have under his belt, how far away he is from the major leagues. Those are questions about Hancock. Didn't pitch much in 2021 after not pitching much prior to the draft in 2020. And the Braves have already been bitten by the pitching injury bug of late, namely Mike Soroka. But this is the kind of deal that represents a chance for Atlanta to add another high upside arm to their mix that might be ready inside of 2 years to continue, them filtering in these arms, just throwing the Kyle Wrights and the Mullers and the Ian Andersons. They just continue to throw these upside guys at the rotation, using them out of the pen, and Hancock would represent another one of those. My own issues with this trade for Seattle start with potentially selling low on Hancock from Seattle's standpoint and ends with the idea of removing high-quality pitching depth from their system. It's not perfect, but it addresses issues with both clubs. as Atlanta runs out of power arms in their system and they get closer to having to pay the Ian Andersons of the world, they get to insert somebody like Hancock into the mix. Now, I picked Hancock despite the shoulder issues and preferred to explain why that is a legitimate flag in this trade, rather than going to Matt Brash or rather than going to Brandon Williamson, and certainly rather than going to George Kirby for obvious reasons. Brash and Williamson do not carry the same kind of upside as Emerson Hancock does. So I'd rather explain that away than say, yeah, Brash, like he's probably going to have to go to the pen at some point pretty early in his career, if not right away. Like, Atlanta's not trading Pache for that. And again, Pache may not hit much, but if you can play 100 games or more and is playable at the plate, he helps the club in 2022. He fills a spot they cannot fill internally, or that they're not sure they can fill internally. And he's a significant upgrade defensively over anybody else they have in the organization. At the end of the day, if I'm Seattle, this isn't a deal I make today, but in a vacuum, there are arrows pointing toward pulling the trigger on such a deal. I think you have to get past the Emerson Hancock questions, which, again, is a rather large hurdle today. That may not be a super large hurdle in May or June, for example, as he gets a chance to pitch through the spring and get the season started in the minors and start putting some of these questions behind him. But that was one. Number two, some of you are going to hate this, but you have to stay with me, and you have to trust me. Noelvi Marte to the Chicago Cubs for